Hi there, and welcome to the Skylight Books Author Reading Series. You can find out about this and all of our other author events at skylightbooks.com, where you can also browse our inventory as well as order books online. You can also follow us on Twitter or even be our friend at Facebook. If you would like to talk to a real person, we can be reached at 323-660-1175. Thanks for listening and enjoy.
But to get started with tonight's reading, which I know all of you are excited about, I'm going to read both authors' bios now, and then they're going to come up here one at a time, and then they're going to do a little Q&A, so you won't have to see me after this. Patrick Rothfuss burst into the fantasy literature scene with the 2007 publication of his debut novel, The Name of the Wind, the first in the Kingkiller Chronicle trilogy. The second book in the series, The Wise Man Fear, came out last month and debuted at #1 on the New York Times hardcover fiction list, which is really something. He teaches... Yay! He teaches college at the college he grew to love as a student, and he acts as advisor for the College Feminists and the local fencing club. When not reading and writing, Pat wastes his time playing video games, holding symposia at his house, and dabbles with alchemy in his basement. Amber Benson is multifaceted. She's a talented writer and actress. She also produces and directs her own work. Her novels include Death's Daughter, Cat's Claw, Among the Ghosts, and her most recent Serpant Storm. She's written, produced, and directed both feature films and a web series. As an actress, she's appeared in dozens of roles in feature films, TV movies, and television series, including 3 seasons of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And I know there's got to be some Buffy fans here tonight. So please help me welcome Patrick Rothfuss and Amber Benson.
Hey. Emma and I were talking over dinner, and I can't even remember how it came up, but we were talking about sex scenes and about how we were both kind of firmly nudged into writing some for our respective books. And this is really weird for me because I have not read anything out of this book at any of my readings so far, except for the prologue, for fear of spoilering it for people. And so, this is the first thing that I'm going to read out of the book itself. Now, who hasn't read book 2 at all? Really? Well, I apologize for any potential spoiler here, but so I'm gonna give it a try. This is a new experience for me. Writing it was interesting enough, but I have to find it. Give me one sec here. Thank you all for coming, by the way. Anybody know where the smut is? It's in here. It's in here. Oh, okay. It's a little bit before this. I know exactly.
Not prepared at all. Sex off that we're doing.
Boy, I don't. People are getting ready to video this. I can see it. I'm gonna be read as a beat up here.
Well, it starts around 6:30.
Yeah, that's where it is. Somebody has it bookmarked here. Okay. Man, I'm already...
Sexy music.
I need somebody with a wah-wah pedal. I'm already starting to sweat. The real question, I don't want to start all the way at the beginning of the chapter. Now, who's read the second one? This will make me feel a little bit better. Okay. So, he's just seen a creature who he only thought was legendary up until this point. Her name is Felurian, and she's filling the archetypal role of the whole Belle Dame sans merci, the beautiful fairy woman that he always thought was kind of a cute but kind of bullshit story, and just stumbles onto her one night not literally, and, sees her across the clearing, and then, after an initial hesitation, decides, why not chase the dangerous fairy woman right through the forest? He wasn't, he's 16. What do you expect out of him? I turned back to the stream. Felurian was watching me. Even from 100 feet away, I could see her dark eyes. Curious, her mouth spread into a wide, dangerous smile. She laughed a wild laugh. It was bright and delighted. It was no human sound. Then she darted across the clearing, swift as a sparrow, graceful as a deer. I leapt to the chase, and despite the weight of my travel sack and the sword at my hip, I moved so quickly my cloak flared like a flag behind me. Never have I run like that before, and never since. It was the way a child runs, light and quick, without the least fear of falling. Felurian ahead of me, into the scrub. I dimly remember trees, the smell of earth, the gray of moonlit stone. She laughs, she dodges, dances, pulls ahead. She waits until I am almost close enough to touch, then skips away. She shines in the light of the moon. There are clutching branches, a spray of water, a warm wind. And I have hold of her. Her hands are tangled in my hair, pulling me close, her mouth eager, her tongue shy and darting, her breath in my mouth, filling my head. The hot tips of her breasts brush my chest. The smell of her like clover, like musk, like ripe apples fallen to the ground. And there is no hesitation, no doubt. I know exactly what to do. My hands are on the back of her neck, brushing her face, tangled in her hair, sliding along the smooth length of her thigh, grabbing her hard by the flank, circling her narrow waist, lifting her, laying her down, and she writhes beneath me, lithe and languorous, slow and sighing, her legs around me, her back arches, her hot hands clutch my shoulders, my arms, pressing the small of my back, and she is astride me, her movements wild. Her long hair trails across my skin. She tosses her head, trembling and shaking, crying out in a language I do not know. Her sharp nails digging into the flat muscles of my chest. And there is music to it, the wordless cries she makes, rising and falling, her sigh, my racing heart. The motion slows. I clutch her hips in frantic counterpoint. Our rhythm is like a silent song, like sudden thunder, like the half-heard thrumming of a distant drum. And everything stops. All of me arches. I am taut as a lute string, trembling, aching. I am tuned too tight, and I am breaking. Whew. I'm glad I get a break now.
Okay, where was the purple-headed monster we were talking about at dinner? All right, mine's like way naughtier. Mine's got like body parts named and stuff. Yours is like hot in like a lyrical kind of way. Mine's hot in well, I don't even know if it's hot, it's just dirty. Oh man. See, I should have read the second book first before we showed it. Oh, okay. Oh, this is embarrassing now. Are there any small children? I know my friend's dad is here, and he already gave me kind of a thing about the sex scenes. Okay. Oh, man.
Is there dialogue? We can read it together.
Yeah. Oh, you man. Stepped in it.
Yeah, I really did.
But you have to do a Southern accent.
I'll do my very best.
You're Frank.
I'm Frank. Give me a little. Can you do fake Southern for me for a little bit, just so I can hear it in my ear?
It's more, not even just like okay. Here,
just a little bit of a drawl.
Yeah, just a drawl.
A little drawl.
Okay. Hey, little lady, kind of, that kind of. Yeah.
I can fake a little bit of a drawl.
I'm nervous now. I wasn't nervous until we had to read the dirty bits because I thought yours was going to be as dirty as mine. Yours is just good. Like lute strings and yeah. Okay. So I'm not even going to give you any lead up. I'm just going to jump right in. I guess I should say she's Death's daughter, and this dude has been sort of in her periphery, and he's been sort of chasing her a little bit. His name is Frank, and he's got a southern drawl and a cowboy hat. And there's naughty things. Okay, wait. Okay, so 2:14:15. Okay. So you start with "Don't worry."
I'll leave you on the mic. Don't worry, a male voice whispered. I've got to do this. Okay. Oh yeah. Oh man.
I feel like we should be doing Islands in the Stream or something. Okay, I'll do the bit in between.
Okay. Don't worry.
A male voice whispered in my ear.
I've got you, little one. You won't fall.
Oh boy. I breathed a sigh of relief when I realized my attacker wasn't the ender of death. But then I remembered that Frank... Sorry, they're podcasting this. And then Frank, the owner of the southern drawl I just heard, was as much my enemy as Marcel was, so I started kicking. Frank jerked away from me, but he still had hold of my hair, and when he moved, he unwittingly snapped my head back, sending a wave of pain up through my neck into my jaw. Ow! I cried as Frank pulled me close and wrapped an arm around me. Anyone walking around us would think I'd just gotten woozy and Frank was the good Samaritan keeping me on my feet.
You don't need to fight me, little lady.
Frank breathed in my ear.
We're on the same side here.
Then why are you kidnapping me? I growled back at him. I got no answer, which left me wondering how long it would take Jarvis to realize I'd disappeared.
Sick lady coming through,
Frank repeated as he duck-walked us back down the stairway, eliciting some nasty comments from the people trying to get up the stairs to make their transfers to other lines. Frank, cowboy hat in hand, ignored the comments, an apologetic smile on his lips. When we got to the bottom of the steps, he made a hard right and dragged me behind the stairwell, which, while not being totally hidden from curious eyes, did afford a bit of privacy. I can't believe we're doing this. I'm so sorry. I know where it's going. Holding tight to my waist, he pushed me up against the wall, pressing his hard-muscled body into mine. I glared at him, but that only seemed to amuse him more.
Calliope Reaper Jones, you are one spitfire of a little lady.
I'm an actor. I should not be laughing. He said, grinning at me.
Yes, sirree, a real hellion.
And then he leaned in and kissed me. I wish I could say I didn't respond to the kiss, that it made me feel gross and dirty and evil. But the truth was much more confused and complicated. And by complicated, I mean it was electric. When he slid his tongue into my mouth, I felt like a pork loin simmering away on the stove. All warm and mushy. My body melting into his. He grabbed... I could do it yeah. He grabbed my ass and hauled me up, my legs wrapping around his waist of their own accord. The kiss deepened, his mouth devouring mine, tasting my tongue and nipping at my lips. We fell back against the wall, his crotch hard against the softness between my legs. He pulled at my shirt, snaking his hands past the flimsy material so he could get at my naked flesh, his hands burning me where they touched my skin. But it was the good kind of burn. He slid his hand up my sides, tickling the flesh as he searched for a way to get at my breasts. When his nimble fingers found my bra, he sighed.
Oh, damn, baby, you feel nice. I'm going to get in trouble with my girlfriend about this. Oh, damn, baby, you feel nice.
He moaned into my neck as he pulled my right bra cup down. See, it's naughty. Freeing my aching breast, the nipple already hard and ready.
You're soft as silk, honey. That's a great This is a great accent for a sex scene. Boy, I hope my cell phone is going off in my pocket. Otherwise, this got really weird. Oh, you are videoing this. That's no fair.
Oh my God. He moaned. Oh, I already did. Yeah, okay.
I rasped.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. He rasped, kneading my breast with his hand. He traced his thumb over my nipple again and again, making it stand wantonly. I moaned when he stabbed his crotch furtively into mine. I moaned when he stabbed his crotch furtively into mine, dry humping me right there. Oh, I'm so sorry. We're going to get through this. Dry humping me right there in the middle of mid-morning commuter traffic. I didn't care that we were on a subway platform doing things to each other's bodies. That should only be attempted in the privacy of one's own bedroom. Because I felt like I was on top of the world. Or at least on top of a very, very sexy hunk of manhood.
Well, thank you.
He started kissing my neck, sucking on the delicate skin below my ear.
Oh, Callie, honey.
He mouthed into my neck. Then he pulled his head away, smiling up at me as I sat astride him. Without a word, he released me from his embrace, and my body slid down the length of him. We stood there staring at each other for a full 10 seconds, our eyes locked together like two dogs. You can't laugh. You laugh.
Sorry.
Oh, my nose is running. We stood there staring at each other for a full 10 seconds, our eyes locked together like two dogs fucking. Then he spun me around, slamming me face first into the subway tiled wall. It should have hurt. Scrap that. It did hurt. But I was too overheated to notice or care, especially when he stuck his hand up under my skirt and yanked down my tights. I was still wearing underwear, but it was so thin and filmy that it was like having nothing on at all.
Baby.
He said, as he slipped his fingers underneath the lacy edges of my panties and plunged his fingers inside me. He slid his fingers in and out of me, and I groaned with every thrust, my entire body quivering as he had his way with me. I'm an actor, I can do this. Oh my God, I moaned. Straining against him as I unexpectedly climaxed, my legs going all limp and useless underneath me. He caught me in his arms before I could hit the ground.
Good girl.
He whispered. We have the meeting out of the palm of our hand. He said, he whispered, kissing my temple before hauling me back onto my feet. I was drunk on sex, dazed and confused, totally out of my gourd. I hadn't done anything so hot and sexy in my entire life. It was like I'd stepped into some soft-core Showtime movie, which had absolutely nothing to do with my real life, and been mistaken for one of the sex extras. It was insanity. I pulled up my tights and readjusted my skirt, but there was nothing I could do to hide the flush of sex that was ripe on my face. I felt giddy with it, wanton and completely satiated. But then a little niggling feeling of guilt crept into my head, buzz-killing my sex high. Daniel, I just cheated on the guy I was supposed to be in love with. Well, at least the guy I thought I was supposed to be in love with.
Wow.
You're a good sport, Patrick. Holy my God.
Wow. You are way better at writing those than I am. Oh, I'm stuck in the accent. Did you hear that? I'm going to be fighting that for the next day and a half. Wow.
Oh my God.
Wow. This is the most entertaining reading I've done.
So Patrick and I met 2 years ago, was it? At Comic-Con. We did a signing at Borders together through Babel Clash, which is part of Borders online. And we just had such a great time talking and debating about urban fantasy and epic fantasy and just literature in general that we wanted to do it again. And he was coming here to come to the Romantic Times convention, and so we decided we would try and make something happen. So I invited my friend Sarah, who's also a novelist and a journalist, to come and sort of debate with us. She has some questions. We'd like you guys to sort of jump in, and we're gonna duke it out and see which is cooler, epic fantasy or urban fantasy. Here, okay.
That was a ton of fun. I don't get to do much spontaneous reading stuff in it.
Oh my God. Well, I don't know how we can possibly top that. But to talk about epic fantasy versus urban fantasy, obviously both subgenres sort of deal with the hero's journey, but as we just heard, in possibly very different ways. I think there's more shopping in Amber's books and maybe more hard to pronounce names in Pat's. But in all seriousness, I wanted to start off just asking you both, what do you think are sort of the key differences between the two?
You're more erudite than me.
I would have to look up erudite. I think one of the big differences for me for urban fantasy is you have a really cool dynamic going on where it's the real world. And so one of the struggles I always have in epic fantasy that's set in a secondary world is that I have to really go to great lengths to convince you of the reality of that world. Whereas in urban fantasy, you're starting with the real world, and you don't have to sell us on, Chicago. We've seen it on a map, at least. And so you get the cool benefit of having that instantaneous realism combined with the coolness of the strange entering this world, where in this epic fantasy, typically it's all happening somewhere else. I think that's where I would draw the biggest line there.
And I think sometimes with urban fantasy, it's the hero's sort of called into it, and there's not a lot of questioning in urban fantasy from what I've read. It's sort of thrust on usually a female protagonist with urban fantasy. I find that's actually the biggest divergence is the female protagonist is much more like urban fantasy paranormal romance, while the epic fantasy is primarily the genre of male protagonists with females that are part of that world. But as you said with Tolkien, yeah. He's really one of the only epic fantasists with a sex scene, guy,
And you see, even there, I was obviously throttling it back. And I've gotten criticism for having so much sex in this book, because they're like, why are you sexing up why are you ruining my epic fantasy with sex? So
it's only epic if there's no sex?
That doesn't make much sense to me.
Yeah, I think all my experiences with sex have been of the epic variety.
Most of mine have been urban.
But I do feel like with the epic fantasy, there is you see more of the true, Joseph Campbell hero's journey. Whereas in urban fantasy, there's not so much of that. It's sort of you're thrust into the world and you sort of accept it. I'm a witch and I can do spells and there's zombies and vampires I want to have sex with them. Whereas in epic fantasy, it is that hero's journey. It's that I don't want to accept. I gotta accept. All right, damn it.
Yeah, and I think urban fantasy tends to be a little bit better with having character-driven stories, because they tend to be smaller stories set in a city with a person trying to figure things out. Maybe they're a romance of a sort, maybe they're a mystery of a sort.
Yeah.
But romances and mysteries tend to be smaller stories with more room in them for the exploration of a character. Whereas if you're trying to save the world from ultimate darkness, there's not maybe as much time to explore personal interaction there.
That's true. The epic fantasy is the purveyance of men going on big epic journeys.
Yeah, a boy and his 4 friends save the world.
Yeah, and with urban fantasy, we just want to have sex with vampires.
Yeah.
Well, I did want to ask about the sort of gender question because, as you mentioned, most urban fantasy protagonists are female, with a couple notable exceptions like Anton Strout's books or Jim Butcher's books. And then epic fantasy, I think, is seen as more the domain of the male. So could you guys talk a little bit about why you think there is that sort of divide?
I want to know.
Yeah. I think, well, all of epic fantasy is in Tolkien's shadow. Tolkien kind of started it, or at least he was the most popular. And so a lot of people, everybody loved it, and then people wanted more of it. So people kind of mimicked that form. And then people mimicked the people who were mimicking the form, and that became epic fantasy. But of course, Tolkien himself was following the form of like the Old Norse Eddas, which by themselves didn't have a whole lot of women or sex in them.
No. Even like the Greek, like Odysseus and his tribe, Homer was all man, and the women were sort of secondary, popping in and out, and laying waste to men's egos so they can go fight, cutting their hair off and doing things to them.
And I think in a lot of ways, I bet urban fantasy has had this huge upsurge kind of as a reaction to the fact that people weren't getting maybe what they wanted from a story out of epic or heroic fantasy, where they're like, I want some sex in my books. I want some romance. I want female characters. And so they probably, eventually if there's a demand, something will arise kind of evolutionarily to meet the need. And I think that's kind of what happened with urban. That's a guess.
Yeah, because Marion Zimmer Bradley wrote Mists of Avalon, which is, I would put that in more of an epic, but it does deal with characters under the auspices of this epic sort of like thing. You're dealing with the women and how they dealt with the men who were going off and doing all this stuff. But Morgana, she was pretty cool for a female character. She did all kinds of crazy stuff.
And you can always find, if you look around, you realize some things that you never would have labeled as urban fantasy really are. Peter S. Beagle, his very first novel, A Fine and Private Place, it's way back in the 60s, and it's perfect urban fantasy. It's like two ghosts in love, and it's a heartbreaking little story that a lot of people haven't read because it's kind of from back in the day, but there was no urban fantasy back then. There was just kind of fantasy, and a lot of people probably didn't read it at the time because what do you call it? There's no orcs.
Charles DeLint, I would put more in the urban fantasy, because he's fantasy, but he does tend more to an urban sort of environment than an epic.
Yeah, Gaiman's Neverwhere.
Yeah, that's another.
And that was probably my first foray into urban fantasy. And then I went back and I read Emma Bull's War of the Oaks.
Oh, I never read that.
Which I think might have been one of the real first modern epic or urban fantasy ones. And I went back and read it and I go, oh, I can see how this has influenced other people who have written since then. Yeah.
And then for each of you, could you talk about why do you choose to write maybe one genre over the other? Why, for instance, is Calliope an urban fantasy hero rather than an epic fantasy hero?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why she's not an epic fantasy hero. I guess her story's not epic enough. I don't know. I guess I tend, because I've read epic fantasy. I love George R.R. Martin. I would put that in the epic fantasy world. It's not full-on fantasy. It's more, historical alternates, university kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But
I think of it as gritty.
Yeah.
That's kind of a big blanket term. It's like fantasy, but it's not. It kind of makes sense.
Yeah, there's no crazy magic stuff.
That sounded bad.
But I don't know. I guess I chose to put her in that format because I've read a lot of urban fantasy. I love Charlaine Harris and Patricia Briggs, and I just wanted to write something in that world. Plus, I felt like my sense of humor lent more to the urban fan. Like, you see what I'm, like the sex extra at Showtime. I mean, that doesn't work in an epic fan. Yeah, you can't do that. Can you?
Well, no. I think you're right. There is kind of this, again, I think it comes from Tolkien, because Tolkien was kind of pulling on this very old, very kind of formal literary tradition. Yeah. And you don't get much more formal than a Norse Edda, But, who wrote Another Roadside Attraction?
Tom Robbins.
Yeah, and reading through that with you, or listening as you read it, I remember...
Even cowgirls get the blues.
Yeah, the two characters getting together in Another Roadside Attraction, and there was the phrase in there that I read it, and I'm like, this is beautiful. I could never write this in epic fantasy, but it was like the girl sees him and they have this moment where they see each other and they fall for each other, and the narrator says, the telephone rang in her womb. That just did a whole page worth of I know exactly what is meant here, but I couldn't write that in epic fantasy, no matter how hard I tried to contrive it.
There's a literary quality to epic fantasy, at least from my experience with that epic fantasy, that isn't so, it's much more pulp with the urban fantasy, I find, which isn't discounting it. It's not saying one is better than the other. It's just a different style of writing. Because sometimes I'll write stuff and I'm like, oh, this doesn't quite work in the urban fantasy world. It's a little too pretty almost. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think, and again, I feel the need to qualify here. We are talking, we're painting with a really broad brush. And anything you say, we're saying about epic, you can find the exceptions for, especially right now, because epic fantasy is very old as a genre compared to urban fantasy.
Yeah.
Which you probably can't consider older than 20 years.
Yeah, if.
But epic can probably go back maybe 40. And so now there's a big reaction to this classic, standard, kind of formal epic fantasy, and there's the people that love that, and then there's the people who are a little bit tired of that, and they're like, why don't we have epic fantasy, but it's character-centered, and we can have women, and some sex, and then some more sex. and so there started to be the deviant epic fantasy, which is really pissing some people off now. I haven't been reading these blogs, but a lot of people keep emailing me and say, have you heard what so-and-so said on their blog about how the new generation of epic fantasy people are ruining epic fantasy?
Aww.
And I'm like, I didn't know that a genre was like a water reservoir. I didn't, that's like people that say, oh, you've ruined poetry. I would be so proud if I ruined poetry. You write a poem so powerfully, boom, it just reverberates through all time and space. Every piece of poetry ever. Runs it through some weird sympathetic process. No, it's like what I've done is I've written a poem that you can like. There's actually a big difference between those two things. And I think that's what's happening now is epic fantasy. You're getting these stories that diverge from this cliche, from this trope that has slowly become a cliche. And so people, when you meddle with something they love, they get a little frisky about it.
Well, I liked what you were saying, we were talking about this in the car, that he's dealing with a young male protagonist. Okay, how many of you were young and male and you weren't attracted to women and you didn't want to have sex with them? Do you know what I mean? So you're reading these epic fantasies, well, they're not having sex, but that's so alien to how teenage or 20-something men are. They want us, every woman they see, right? Well, most, maybe, I don't know. I'm not a teenage boy. I feel like one sometimes. But it seems sort of false to not have that be an aspect of your character's journey, that they would see women and be attracted to them.
And I could understand it in terms of the focus of the story, in the same way that you don't see much of the functioning economy of the world in The Lord of the Rings, because the major imports and exports of Mordor really aren't relevant to the story.
There are people that will argue with you.
And similarly, you could argue that in terms, like what's really important to the story is sort of these big heroic high notes, you know, like the battles and the good versus evil and the struggle of the desire for power over wisdom, which is divesting yourself of power, all of these kind of grand themes. And so, and you know, nobody goes to the bathroom. Because it's not that sort of story. It's not that it doesn't happen, it's just that if you focused on that,
it would be urban fantasy.
When I was struggling to describe what sort of a world I was writing, I'm like, you know, I write fantasy, but it's gritty. And they go, well, what does gritty mean? I'm like, you could get an STD. I don't think there's syphilis in Middle Earth. How would it spread? Nobody has sex. Everybody reproduces by budding. Elves are all, they reproduce via parthenogenesis.
Oh, man.
Yeah, that's gonna
Just one more thing, and then I want to turn it over to the audience for questions. Would either of you ever cross over to the other side of the urban epic divide? And if so, what kind of story would you write?
I would love to write an epic fantasy. I don't know if I have the wherewithal. I mean, I write 100,000 words. He writes 300 and some odd thousand words. So it's a big commitment to write an epic fantasy, but I would love to dabble in that world.
I think it'd be fun going over to urban fantasy too. Of course, the grass is always greener.
Of course, yes.
I go, oh, 100,000 word book, what a treat. But then if I was trying to write it, I'd be like, no, oh, beautiful words. But the other thing that I would like is, the other problem I think I would have is that I did read 1,000 epic fantasy novels, like when I was a teenager. And so I kind of absorbed and internalized all of that and digested it slowly over the years. Whereas I've just now, probably within these last 3 or 4 years, started to read urban fantasy. Yeah. And I don't yet feel the way about urban fantasy that I felt about epic fantasy, where I loved it, but I was bored with it. And so I wanted to write my book. And now I'm starting to read urban fantasy, and I'm like, I could do some funny things. There are some trends that are becoming cliches that I could really have some fun with if I wrote my urban fantasy.
Vampires, werewolves, zombie. Wait, what would be your?
All plus lesbian unicorn. I'm not even kidding. I've got it all worked out in my head. Copyright. I'm going to be pissed if somebody writes that lesbian unicorn.
We look forward to seeing that the next time you're here in LA.
Yeah, there we go. Dialogue in.
Yeah.
So I'm playing the lesbian unicorn.
We would both be lesbian unicorns. Man, I'm writing that tomorrow.
And on that note, let's open it up to the audience. If you guys have thoughts on this whole epic versus urban fantasy thing, or if you want to comment on something that's been said, or if you just have a question, raise your hand. Right here.
I just wanted to ask if you've read Jim Butcher's Furies of Calderon series and compared that with Harry Dresden stuff, because it looks like that's what he was doing, playing with both worlds, and they're both so good. And the Furies, both of them make you want to go back and reread them a bunch of times to see how they all kind of connect. And just wanted to hear your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, Butcher's a rare beast in that not only does he write these really good books, he does it on a very good schedule, which makes me look like a chump. And he did both, epic and urban.
I haven't read the epic stuff of his.
It's that's somebody's desperately trying to get, just in case I have a baby at home, just in case, it's my girlfriend with some really important news. It'll be 1 second. It's not. It's the only thing that could potentially make me interrupt this.
This is why I like Pat. He's awesome.
But I think it is kind of a rare person that can do both of those. Like Gaiman, like in Sandman. Sandman, I think you could probably point at as one of the formative things of urban fantasy too. While at the same time being extraordinarily literate.
Yeah.
And very complex and interwoven and just good everything. But, and I've forgotten the question or all
Just how did you like it? Did you enjoy the Codex, Valera Codex, and how it compared?
I did. I won't say that it's like my favoriteest epic fantasy ever, but yeah, it held up very well and had cool original concepts, which is really kind of what I need at this point if I'm going to read epic fantasy. I can't read another clone of Tolkien. I just don't have it in me.
Are there tropes you guys are like tired of in your respective subgenres, or that you just never want to read again?
I mean, it's just that the repetitiveness of like the vampire, werewolf, sex with each other, and like, I mean, all that stuff. I just get annoyed. Like, it's just the repetitiveness of it. It's just the same over and over and over again. I mean, it's like elves in epic fantasy. It's like it has to have an elf or it's not an epic fantasy.
Yeah, and it's usually the details or the props that end up being so repetitive. I can handle an elf, but I really don't want another ancient, long-lived elf
with long blonde hair,
with long blonde hair and a bow. You know, I could go my whole life very happily without ever reading another dwarf with a Scottish accent. It's really insulting, and honestly, it treads. It's not even on a fine line. You know, there's like really creepy, racist shit that you don't have to read very hard. Yeah, I mean, like all dwarves are one way, all elves are one way. What? You go, oh no, it's different because they are actual different races, and actually it shows that they're not all like that because these two people, they get to be friends and they show that. You know, they put aside their differences. They put aside their differences because they are different races, and even different races can be. No, you really made a mess of that whole racial thing right there. If you think that makes it better, that's another thing. Epic fantasy constantly strays into dangerous, like racial subtext. I mean, the orcs. Come on. It's a whole race of people who, by definition, are evil. So it's okay to kill them.
Yeah.
That doesn't work.
I'm sorry, I just have to say, like, R.I. Salvatore kind of explores that a little bit with Dark Elf Trilogy. Yeah, it's kind of shallow, it's kind of, it's very D&D and very,
But any step in the right direction.
Yeah, that's kind of how I...
We'll take a tiny step over no step.
I think there's.
I had a question for you. So does your lesbian unicorn, does it glitter in the sunlight when it goes out there?
The question I always ask is, were I a lesbian, would I want to glitter? And I would think yes.
I think there's one back here.
I have a question. When George was getting ready to launch his Song of Ice and Fire, he reread Tolkien. And he did a really deep analysis of how much magic was in sort of which was actually very, very little if you look at it. And what I noticed in your book is that you seem to tread very lightly. I mean, you can lightly salt the magic. It's not a sort of constant presence. I mean, was that also a conscious choice on your part, and why?
Not specifically with the magic, but I didn't want the focus to be on the fantasy. I knew from my story the focus was going to have to be on the character and the events in his life, and especially because he was like a young boy through most of it. He couldn't be having a lot of car chases and sword fights and killing the ultimate evil because he's like 14. And so I had to come up with other legitimate sources of tension and conflict for a 14-year-old boy that he could realistically overcome. And so I was playing a whole different game from Tolkien. But similarly, Tolkien proved that you don't need a lot of magic. I mean, if you have a little bit of magic, then the little bit of magic is really cool. If everybody can, like, hook up fireballs, then it's like, woo.
Other questions? Right here?
Yeah, actually, slightly on topic of this, okay. You just mentioned tension and, the depth of character that you were going for as a historian. one of the things that I kept seeing, and I have a question more about craft, is I immediately cared for your characters, and they were in peril. Both, if I'm saying that right, is in he's trying to get into a school, and in this moment, he's trying to get into a school, just a college. There's so much like life or death tension. How do you, as a writer, like, what do you do to create that kind of tension in that moment? Because I'm trying to write, and I don't know if I'm succeeding at that, and I want to have some insight into that.
Well, I think this is something that epic fantasy people have to deal with way more, typically, because you're not saving the world. There's no army of orcs, so you can't kind of rely on, apocalypse to raise the tension of the story.
Yeah.
How do you pull it off?
Oh, I think well, we were talking about this in the car again, the idea of having a secret, having something that your character is striving for, that is inside of their head, that you don't, like, you dole out pieces of it over the course of the book, so that you're not just like giving everything up front. You're not just like, here's the goods, you slowly start to bring more and more into the story, so that people, each nugget you give them brings them into your character and creates a little bit more tension, because they're starting to really care about the character. I think it's really having an empathy for your character. If the audience goes with you on this journey, then they're going to be tense throughout any peril you put them in, because they don't want your character to die or something bad to happen to your character.
And I think that's absolutely it. It comes down to an emotional connection with the characters. And that's why, that's one of the reasons that The Lord of the Rings works. You don't worry about Aragorn, because he's so cool. And Gandalf, comes back from the dead. Spoiler alert. But the hobbits are there to be relatable and to be ultimately vulnerable. And so you are anxious about them in these huge battles and being overwhelmed by these huge events. And I think you're right, if you take that out of the epic, because really, there's a decent argument to be made that I don't write epic fantasy. There is no invading army. It's fair to say maybe heroic fantasy, or big fantasy, like thick fantasy.
Doorstop fantasy.
I've heard the term BFF, it's big fat fantasy.
I like that.
But if the reader does care about your character, and your character cares about something, then by extension, getting into a school, or impressing a girl, or not looking like an idiot, or getting into the library, if you parse it right, those things can be very tense. But it's trickier. It's way easier to
throw a plot device in and be like, okay, big invading army, it's the end of the world, and
everything's on fire.
Yeah.
I did that once. Yeah. There's something to be said for everything's on fire.
But like with Bilbo Baggins, you see the fallibility of the character, you see the human quality of the character, where he doesn't always make the right choices. And if your character, and that's something I have a beef with. Oh, everyone okay back there? I have a beef with urban fantasy, because it's there's never any questioning of it. There's never any fallibility to these characters. They immediately just take on these special powers and go out and fight the good fight. Whereas I think what you're doing specifically is you're creating characters that sometimes make the wrong choice or fail, and then we as people relate to them and we feel their pain. We empathize with them.
Yeah, and that's what I always think about in terms of writing a realistic story. Part of it's the world, but a lot of it is the people. And you can't have a 16-year-old that doesn't make terrible choices. Sometimes very clever, terrible choices.
Yeah.
I remember reading in your blog that you mentioned that the framing of the story with chronicler and everything was actually one of your later revisions to it. And so, two questions that lead off of that. What made you decide to frame it in that light, and why, I guess more to you then, why is it not seen as often in urban fantasy? Because I don't see that very often. You see framing more often in epic fantasy than you do in the urban.
Could you repeat the question?
It's the frame story. I have somebody telling a story in my book, and then you see somebody telling. It's like the Arabian Nights thing, where somebody is telling a story in the story. And then in the story that somebody's telling, sometimes somebody tells a story.
A Matryoshka story.
Yeah.
Lots of little stories and one big story.
I stumbled into it, in all honesty. I'd written a big chunk of it. It started, "My name is Clove." And he went and he just told a big chunk of story. And a friend read it. And they said, "So who's he talking to?" I went, "Wow, that's a fair question." But honestly, the only reason you would ask that question is because most books are third person. And the only reason they're that way is because of a weird literary tradition that started in the Victorian times. It's just weird tradition. There's no reason, because third person is affected and it's odd. That's not how anyone naturally tells a story. I don't say, yesterday he... No, I mean, what you do is you tell stories out of your life. You go, I was in the car, and we talked about this, and then this happened to me. That's the most natural form of storytelling. I can't claim that I chose the frame story for any real good logical reason. I just stumbled into it and then made it work.
Urban fantasy tends toward first person. So that stream of consciousness, and that's what I chose to do with my book. And it annoys a lot of people. They're just like, I hate this. I don't want to know what she's thinking 24/7. But I feel like you want to get inside your character's head. You want to know what they're thinking, because with an omnipotent narrator, which is great for some things, you never quite understand why the person is doing what they're doing. It's all inference. You're inferring that they're doing it because of this, or the reader or the narrator will tell you that this might have happened to them at another time in their lives, and that's why they're doing what they're doing. But I think with urban fantasy, especially because you're telling a woman's story, you want to know why they're doing what they're doing, because we make crazy choices. I think we're just trying to help you guys out a little with urban fantasy. Really, it's a manual to help you understand the female sensibility.
Yeah, I also think that because character is so much more important, typically in urban fantasy, it helps establish the emotional connection with the character when you are reading the whole thing and kind of riding behind their eyes.
Yeah.
I think we have time for one more in the back.
Just kind of following on that talk about first person, do either of you give much thought to the reliability of the narrator? And the reason I ask that is because a friend and I were having a discussion before this book came out about how much we could trust what book tells us about the story. But then there's that scene in there where he gets really upset with Bass, and he's like, "No, yes, I'm telling you."
Be a little careful here. I've already spoiled some of the sex, but we do have a few.
You read the sex scene.
You had to know there was going to be a little sex in it.
But where Quoth seems to assert pretty strongly that, yes, everything that I'm telling you about the story is 100% true. And I was just curious if that was something you weighed back and forth at all, or if it just kind of happened.
It's a good question.
Good answer, sir.
We could probably do one more after that. It'd be a weird note to end on.
Thank you. Good night.
Anyone else? Right here?
I'm on page 700 of Life and Spirit. Both is 16 years old. And I've heard this is a projected trilogy. And I'm really worried how you're going to fit the rest of his life into that third book. I'm worried you're going to give him short script.
It's a good question. A lot of people have said that.
Well, here's sort of something leading off of that, because both epic and urban fantasy do tend towards series. You want to know what happens to these characters. So when you guys started writing both of your books, did you have a projected, like, this is definitely a trilogy, this is definitely,
we were just talking about this, actually.
Yes, mine was a trilogy. And then I finished the third book, and I had killed off a character, and they called me like, hey, we're going to do 2 more. So I had to go back in and unkill a character. So yeah, that wasn't very exciting. So mine was projected as a trilogy, and yours kind of...
Absolutely a trilogy. Absolutely a trilogy. A trilogy.
All right here.
Kind of on that note, there's obviously some passages where Quoth just says, and then this, and this happened, and that's all we hear about it. And I'm pretty sure that you have the same thing where you write a whole bunch more, and in the editing process it gets chopped. How do you go about deciding what stays in and what leaves? I mean, is it better for the narrative of the story? Do you feel sometimes just a quick word is the best way to get that across? And does that still exist, and will we ever see it?
I would much rather leave something out and have all of you want it than to put something in and have half of you be bored.
Yeah, you read, sometimes you'll read like an Anne Rice book or something, she'll describe the carpet for like 5 pages. Wow, sleep at the wheel for that one. Yeah, it's always better to leave them wanting more.
Yeah, and that's always my philosophy. And it sounds weird to say that I strive for brevity, but I really do. It sounds ridiculous. It's true. Absolutely true.
They don't believe you at all.
I struggled to keep this book as short as it is. I got 80,000 words out of this.
Oh my God.
You know?
You cut my whole book out of it.
In another couple of years, if I look at it again, could I trim some more with some more distance between me and the text? Maybe. But right now, looking at it, like everything in there is kind of important for at least 2 reasons. Now, all of those reasons might not be readily apparent, but stay a while. I'll be faithful.
I think we're going to move to the signing. Do you guys have any final urban versus epic, sparkly, lesbian, unicorn words you want to share?
Yeah, I don't know if one wins.
Do you think we could write something that was both?
Yeah, how is
Epic,
that?
urban.
Epic.
I would love to try to write something that was, I bet you could.
You could.
I bet you'd have to create this world, but then have it be like urban fantasy in that world.
Yeah.
A dwarf with a New York accent.
That would take some doing.
That'd be intense.
Yeah. No, Shadowrun would have to be urban because it's in this world.
Yeah.
I would almost think, anybody read Kiss Me Deadly?
Yes.
Yeah, that was kind of like, what'd you call it?
Epic.
Epic fantasy.
Urban fantasy. That sounds like a noise you make when you're sick. But yeah, I think that's a genre we might see more and more of, where people still want to have that secondary world, but they want to play the urban fantasy game.
Stevenson kind of treads into that territory with like Diamond Age and slightly, but it's more hard sci-fi.
Yeah.
But there is an epic quality to it, and then you do have a lot of character stuff. I don't know.
I think Neuromancer is almost like urban fantasy. I bet you you could make a good argument for that. So wherever you're going to draw the lines, it's going to be arbitrary in most cases.
You say epic, and I say Eben.
Eben fantasy was more one impression. But other than that, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And also a thanks for our lovely hosts.
Yes. Thank you,
That was totally amazing, and I think it deserves another big round of applause. Amber Benson, Patrick Rothfuss.
You've been listening to the Skylight Books author reading series. Don't forget that you can check out this and all of our other great podcasts at www.skylightbooks.com. Today's music was provided by Fragile Gang. You can check them out at MySpace, Facebook, and the iTunes Music Store. Thanks for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.